Plugin of the week is the iZotope Neutron. Neutron is a plugin. There's actually a couple different stages of it. There is the Neutrino plugin, which is free. If you go to the iZotope website, you can download this for free. They'll give you a serial number, you authorize it, and it's a really simple, straight-ahead plugin. Just wanted to show you that very quickly because it's sort of part of what's going on here, which is the Neutron. There's also the Neutron, which comes like a multi-level processor, something similar to Ozone, but with a lot of interesting adaptations and a lot of abilities to do things that are not implemented, at least not at this point, into the Ozone. This is designed more for mixing, where the Ozone is designed more for mastering work. And if you get the advanced version of Neutron, then what you get also is the individual components, which you can then break out and use as individual plugins, because maybe you don't need the whole unit. In overview, basically what you have here is a graphic user display that gives you an EQ, two compression stages, an exciter, a transient shaper. So you have 5 stages here that you can move around. You could turn them on. You can move them in different orders, etc., etc. Each component, when you bring it up, shows up here in the window below. Sometimes you'll see some additional settings here. So if I work with the EQ, it gives me different forms of EQ that I can add in, and the different things like filter types and stuff like that. You get different features based on what it is that you're using. So we'll go through some of those types of things. There's so much here that there will be a lot of stuff that will be an overview. Otherwise, this could easily end up being a 2-hour overview, and I'm not going to get into that. But the basics are, we have this. When you instantiate these, if you do it on a full mix, and what I have here is a group of them primarily set up on some stems here, just so we can kind of work with them quickly, and I can isolate things down pretty quickly, and just to give you an idea of what it sounds like and what the basic setup is. Essentially what you have here is the individual tracks. You can name them, so you can create and set up the individual instantiations as you go along. And so if I call up a second one over here, I can give it a name, and this is the effects, or the effects stem. And each one along the way, I could just type in what the name is. This becomes important because of some features that are added into this, which you won't find in the Ozone, because there's some intelligent characteristics in all of this that are factored in. There's a feature called Track Assistant. Track Assistant allows you to set up parameters where it can devise, after analyzing the audio that you feed into it, a variety of different possibilities for setups, for like a full setup. If you're familiar with the iZotope products, there are lots of presets that they typically give you. So when you open up the presets, there's loads of things that you can just open up and load in different settings. But what this does is it actually intelligently analyzes what it is that you're going on. So when you open up the Track Assistant, you could give an idea of what you want to go for: a subtle approach, a medium, or an aggressive approach, and then you could decide what characteristic that you want. You want it to be upfront and mid-rangey. And then when you go ahead and set this to process, click on it, then what it'll do is it'll do an analysis. You play the music through for about 4 to 10 seconds, and then it comes up with some form of a mock EQ that emulates from those basic characteristics what it is that you might want. And you could do this sort of channel by channel as you go along. The idea is that it's a quick way to kind of build together a mix and get a basic thing, and then from that building point, you can then go in and tweak the settings. So maybe it gets you 80% there or 90% there, much the way that a preset does, but it puts it in. But the idea is that, you know, one of the problems that I've always found with presets that I think they've really addressed well here is that with the preset, it's sort of a generic thing that's set up based off of whatever the program material is. So it's not in relation to where you are at that particular point. The idea of this is that when you load it in, it analyzes what you have and then adapts a preset accordingly. And this can work for, for individual sounds, for full mixes, for stems, etc. And then you can kind of set up the parameters. Now, essentially, what we had here, I actually had a plugin. I'm just going to take a step back here and just show you something here. There's a small plugin that I showed you that's for free called Neutrino. We have the main plugin here. Now, this plugin here is actually included at the output stage. So the signal flow of this starts with an input level control. You have the 5 processors here that kind of come along with it. You go to the Neutrino output. So this is a harmonic enhancement for the output stages, or what they call like a spectral shaping tool that kind of gets put in there on the end. Then you go through the output stage here, and then there's also a peak limiter. And on the peak limiter here, you have a threshold control here that can be used in one of 3 different modes with 3 different characteristics. And so this gives you the ability to, say, for example, shape like a whole mix and put out a whole mix that would be output limited, and it would be intersample peak detailed, so that you wouldn't have any sample overages or intersample between sample peaks. So there's a lot to go through here. So let's just kind of start maybe with a little bit of audio, and we'll kind of show what some of the shaping tools are, and also show you some of the cool things that they've also added in. There's a masking feature. So I want to kind of show you this. And the way that I'm going to show you this is I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to kill this neutrino here, because we don't really need this. But what I've done is I've set up another neutron on an individual track. So if I open this guy right here, this is on the base track. And so what I have normally here in this spectrum, let me just kind of get rid of this guy here, is I have, in actuality, what I normally have here is my base, which is fed into the drum stem. Okay, so that's what I have here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that with the effect to the analog output stage. All right, and so I have a little bit of audio here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tail this down. Right, so I have my bass with effect going on in here. So now what I have is a bass here. The idea of the masking tool, which is kind of cool, is that I can select any other instantiation here, and I could see the effect that that has on my existing track. So something that might be relevant might be the way that the kick drum affects the bass, or the bass affects the kick drum. And so I can actually have some kind of interactive thing here. So what you'll notice here on this end, what I have is an EQ here that is actually for the bass. And what I can do is I can actually adjust parameters here that you see are adjusting in the bass simultaneously with what I'm seeing over here, which is in the drums. So the idea is that if there are any interference patterns, I can display those interference patterns. So let's just see. So what you'll see is a little bit of an analysis showing you primarily where the bass frequencies might be masking the drums. I can set the sensitivity to make that more or less apparent. Okay, so I can get kind of a good idea of what's going on. And then what I could do is I can set this up. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to do a boost, something to that effect in the drums, like maybe on the kick drum. What I could do is I could do this, and if I invert it, it'll do the opposite EQ on the bass. And what that does is it gives me the ability to kind of shape something where 2 things are interactive and relative right to each other. So this may be 2 guitars that are working against each other, a guitar and a keyboard, a Fender Rhodes and a Hammond organ, etc., etc. And you can inverse them, you could keep them, you can bypass the EQs, which is a temporary thing, so you could hear what it's like with and without. And you get the basic idea. So that's a really powerful tool, and it's a great way that you can have this interrelationship between different things that are going on. Now, when you work with the EQ itself, so I'm going to take the masking off here for a second. The EQ also has a button down at the bottom here. So there's many ways that you can work with it. So if I was just working, for example, with and I wanted to work with this fundamental EQ, but I didn't want to leave this on all of the time, I'm going to just, so if I alt click or option click here on this filter, I can actually hear the frequency that I've actually boosted there. There's also some other shortcuts. If I shift click, it'll keep it locked with frequency, or locked with, depending upon which way I move it, or locked with gain, depending upon whether I move it left, right, up, or down first. So there's some cool features there. We can also increase the Q. I can make a proportional Q or band shelf, so that'll make it a little bit wider or narrower, so it gets narrower the more I boost, as opposed to being sort of either fixed or getting wider. It looks like the band shelf is getting wider. I can adjust the frequency here. I can adjust the gain and the Q here, so I can play with the parameters from this perspective. And if I want to, I can turn on dynamic mode, and now this becomes a dynamic EQ. And then I have a separate threshold here. Right, so if I just kind of show this here, all right, so if I get it to expand here, what I can do is I can get it as an upward expander that kind of adapts to and works, you know, within this band, giving me a dynamic. So any of these EQs can be a static EQ or a dynamic EQ. They can either downward compress or they can expand, upward expand. So you have the ability to get it work towards that. Or for example, if I wanted to do something here where at the same time, let me just move that shelf out of the way, turn that guy off. So if I wanted to do a simultaneous dip, this is sometimes a cool way, like if I do a simultaneous dip in the low mid-range. So if I start with that, turn on that mode, do a downward compression, then what happens is that dips. At the same time, the low end boosts, and what that does is it can help the low end to kind of sink or drop a little bit more. And then I can turn this off. Right, and then I also have for each of the individual controls, I also have a wet-dry control, giving me a complete parallel EQ or a parallel compressor. And you get the basic idea. I mean, you can kind of go on and on with it. Some really cool things here. The shelving EQ can work in 3 different modes: a Baxandall mode, a vintage mode, which gives you some resonance shaping. So if I just kind of clear these guys out, I could just show you this real quick. So in the vintage shaping here, I can make it resonate in different ways. The Baxandall EQ gives you more of like, you know, a long tilting EQ with a little bit of a dip on the other side to help shape it, and then you get kind of more of a standard shelf type of thing. And then the Q itself also helps you to kind of sharpen what it is that it's doing, you know, based on the frequency. So it's a very musical EQ overall. So in that sense, I really dig it. I also have the ability here to, I got a low pass or high pass filter and a low pass filter, so I could work with those as a resonant characteristic here, which again I can kind of shape here and work with. That's really powerful for lots of things. Shift the frequency here. I can also make that work. This I can't make work dynamically. The other bands I can make work dynamically. But you have a lot of bands bypassed, and if you're not sure what it is that you want to do and you want to get some feedback from it, if you just hit the learn button and I now feed this in, what's going to happen is it's going to try to find some basic resonance points. So this is going to be a fundamental frequency of the kick drum, and this is probably something in the area of the clap. If I add bands in there, I can get them to kind of shift around. All right, so things will kind of dance around a little bit. Sometimes you can find like resonance points or kind of cool points there, so it'll kind of selectively pick up different things. If I want to just use the track assistant, I could show you here how just with a medium setting, and I want to make this really upfront. Maybe I want to make this warm and open, let's just say there. And with this mode, I'm going to hit play. And so what it does is it comes up with a setting that has an EQ, it has an exciter that has some different things in it, it has a compressor, multiband compressor here, a second compressor over on this end, which is a vintage compressor, and then we have Neutrino set to a drum percussion mode with a set amount of detail here, no limiter. You get the basic idea, right? So now you can get it to basically learn what it is that, you know, and it can give you or shape like a certain sound naturally for you. I'm just going to load in like a full preset. Again, you could just kind of or go back to the default settings here just for a second and kind of go through it, because I want to go through some of the other elements that are in here. The compressor is also very cool. It starts off as a full band compressor. You have a ratio control, a knee control, etc., attack and release settings, etc. You also have a wet dry within this spectrum, as well as having it on the global. If you add a second band, like if I turn on the second band, I now have a crossover point. And if I add the third band in, I now have a third crossover point. So now I have a three-band multi-band compressor. And then I can work with all of these settings, set some individual things up. And what's really cool is that within each of these, there's also a whole series of sidechain keying. And there are internal things that I can work with, so I can have internal feeds or external feeds that are feeding into individual bands. So the idea is that there's loads of possibilities of getting interaction between different components, either within this single neutrino or from outside of the other, in addition to just some of the things you saw with the masking feature and with the track assistant. So you can kind of get a whole bunch of stuff there. The compressor can work in vintage mode, which gives you these meters. It gives you a certain it doesn't give you a specific type. I guess it's a variation of different types, but you can work in RMS peak or true mode. So this gives you different colorations or setups. There's an auto gain, there's an auto release control, which you have with some of these. So if I turn that off, you have an auto release. This can kind of help you to shape a sound. That's really helpful, especially for things where there's not like a consistent rhythmic movement with a particular instrument, where it switches from sustained to more transient or percussive. So those types of things. And then you can basically set up a little learning characteristic here. And what it's doing is it has some audio there. It's going to kind of set up some basic parameters based on what it's here, and what it does is it'll kind of give you some crossover points with which that you're working in. So there's some really amazing features that kind of build into all of this. From there, there's a second compressor here. Again, you could layer this on. This just gives you the ability to have perhaps like a multi-band compressor and a full band compressor, a limiter. Maybe you do something more in vintage mode here, but you do something that's a little bit more aggressive in shaping. There's also an exciter. If you're familiar with the exciter from the Ozone, there's a lot of similar characteristics that kind of work within this. So you have some different modes. There's also a learn mode. You also have different bands, so you can work within different bands. Again, we can kind of have this learn, like some different characteristics of to kind of separate just some different areas of the beat. And then I also have the ability, I have a percentage blend. So let's say I can drive a certain percentage into this, right? Into and then mix in how much of it that I want. So maybe I want a little bit more of an edgy kind of low end, and then I can take them and I can work them in different directions. Or more of a tape characteristic. More of a tube saturation. Or a warm characteristic. And the cool part about this is that I can kind of work these into different amounts. So as I move this toward this, it'll add more tube. Or if I move it this way, it'll kind of give me a blend of retro and tape, or retro and warm, or tape and warm. So you kind of have these parameters that you can move around, because you may want to have like more of a warming characteristic on the top end, and have maybe more of an edgy characteristic with a tube in the mid-range, and then more character in the low end. So it gives you a lot of ability to shape. You also, with these, same with the multi-band, you have a bypass and a solo for each individual band. So you can kind of work within that characteristic all in there. So this is really cool because on the ozone you get selectable settings that are these basic settings. And this gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of the way that you actually control it. As if this wasn't enough, you also have a transient shaper. And the transient shaper, it can also be multiband. And then you have different shaping or knee characteristics. You can control the attack or sustain, so we can make that a little bit more aggressive, right? Give it more body. Or if it was a little too punchy and digital sounding, sometimes you can kind of limit that and give it a little bit more warmth by putting a little bit more energy into the sustain, so you have some control characteristics there. Again, you can have it learn what's going on. You could work with, different, style of characteristics here. Again, you can move these guys around within each other. You can load individual presets, which you can store for each of these little elements in between all of the major overall defaults. There's also an options panel here, so you can go through all of the different things, including connecting your social networks. I'm not sure about all of that, but whatever. I guess with plugins, it could be a cool thing. Meters, so you could set different metering characteristics as defaults, EQ setups as defaults, transient shaping. In other words, you can kind of work within all of the parameters. Every time I look at this, I find some other feature set and way of using it. So it's really powerful, just the way that you can kind of move around all of this stuff. And then on top of that, we have the neutrino mode. And the neutrino mode defaults to clean, which is nothing, but basically you get 4 different characteristics. So in this case, I would select drums and percussion. And this gives me like an overall shaping. So if it's designed to be a bit more on the subtle side. But it can kind of give you a little bit of spectral shaping on the output side, on the end, something that's sort of dynamic and completely under the hood and basically simple. You just have 2 controls here, and you kind of deal with it accordingly. And then you have a limiter on the output, and this basically allows you an output maximizer. So this would be great for mix bus stuff. Again, it's so hard to kind of go through everything that's in this, but it's a really, 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 really amazing, powerful plugin. Sounds great, as does all of the iZotope stuff. And this is really a welcome addition to the collection from iZotope, and a really great one. I guess that's about as simple as I can make it. And that is why it is the plugin of the week, the iZotope Neutron.